Hey everybody, it's Mr. Marvin. In this video, I'm going to give you some specific feedback on your synthesis essay rough drafts. So over the past 3 days, I think 4 of my classes have submitted rough drafts to me this week. And so that means I've graded like something close to 60 papers over the course of the last 3 days. So boy, are my arms tired. But for those of you that may not be familiar with videos like this, usually what I do when I grade papers is I keep a running list of common issues that I see, and then I make a video like this to kind of give you a bunch of feedback that you can consider as you revise your work over the upcoming week. Due to efficiency's sake, this video is going to be for my 101 and 101S classes. So whether you are in one of my online classes or one of my newly online classes, if you have written a synthesis essay rough draft over the past week, this video is for you. So as always, you want to have a blank sheet of paper handy at the very least so you can take notes. Be sure to pause, rewind, and rewatch as necessary. It's also a good idea to have a copy of your essay in front of you just so you can have, so you can hear my feedback in the context of your own essay. If you're not familiar with getting graded feedback, or graded drafts that is, from me on Blackboard, what you want to do is go into the Blackboard course, and then in the sidebar, you'll want to click on My Grades and then find the assignment in question. In this case, it would be the synthesis essay rough draft. And if you click on that, you should see a little speech bubble icon, which will give you your graded essay attempt with all of my comments. And you'll see lots of inline comments, in the essay itself, as well as my overall comments on the side. So please be sure that you take the time to go through all of those comments and to make sure that you understand my feedback and to get in touch with me if you do not understand the feedback. That is most important. Let's see here. So I've got my list actually here on screen for you in case you want a preview of some of the things that I'm going to talk about. I'll try to be as efficient as possible, although the list is not super long. Some of these things are relatively complex, and we'll want to make sure that I explain them as clearly as possible. The first thing I have here is how to see those inline comments on Blackboard, which is what I just explained. It says not as much inline commenting or editing as usual. I don't know if that's actually the case because, as always, I tend to have a difficult time resisting fixing various errors and stuff. As you know, the purpose of the rough draft is not for me to fix every single error, but to sort of give you high-level feedback in terms of thesis statements and whether your paragraphs are organized and, whether your sources are well integrated, kind of the major, big, high-level stuff that we really want to make sure we have down. But at the same time, I will try to point out little grammatical things here and there as I see them. Just like the first paper, this paper is going to be graded using content, style, and formatting, 3 equal categories. I think for all of my 101 classes, this is a 15-point essay. So that means 5 points for content, 5 points for style, and 5 points for formatting. Make sure that you don't lose any of those points for MLA formatting. That is a very silly way to lose points. There is a MLA formatting demo video. There is a whole MLA style guide in the course resources area. And this is something that you should know how to do at this point by paper number 2. So just make sure that you are following MLA format so you don't lose any points unnecessarily. If you can't figure out how to do something in Microsoft Word or in Google Docs, just get in touch with me and I'll help you figure it out. 2 of my super frequent comments are this sentence could be better, read it out loud, and awkward phrasing. I know I've talked about these before in previous videos. But they are comments that I tend to leave pretty frequently. So just to remind you, a sentence that could be better is a sentence that needs work. And a sentence could need work for various reasons. It could be because it's wordy. It could be because it's not super clear. It could be because it's confusing. It could be because it just doesn't sound like something a human being would actually say. So it could be any number of things that give you this comment. The best thing to do with a sentence like this is to read it out loud and listen to how the sentence sounds. And that should alert you to what is going wrong or what could be stronger in a sentence like that. Again, I do tend to fix a lot of things or tell you what is wrong as specifically as I can most of the time. But a lot of times a sentence is just not as strong as it could be for any number of reasons. And there isn't one obvious solution So what I'm trying to do with a comment like this is just point out to you that a sentence needs work, and it is up to you to try to figure out how to make that sentence better. If there's ever a sentence that you don't know how to improve it, feel free to post it in course questions or get in touch with me via other means, and we can figure it out. Awkward phrasing is very much the same. If it's an awkward phrase, it just doesn't sound natural. It doesn't sound like something a human being would actually say. As always, you do want to write the way you speak in the sense that you want your writing to sound natural, and most of us have a pretty natural time speaking aloud. But at the same time, you also don't want to be graded on the way that you speak, in casual conversation. So writing the way you talk can be a good way to get a lot of ideas out on paper and to just get your paragraphs down, but you do always want to go back and reread and listen to how they sound to make sure that they sound professional and academic and error-free. I want to spend quite a bit of time reviewing the assignment sheet because I've been teaching this assignment for many years now, and despite the fact that I kind of know what some of the common mistakes are, and I try to address those things in my initial explanation video about the assignment, I still found myself repeating the same comments and the same feedback over and over again in terms of what you should be doing in this assignment and what you should not be doing in this assignment. So this is a good opportunity to reiterate the importance of watching the explanation videos closely, taking notes on them, rewinding if you need to, asking me questions if you need to, and also reading the assignment sheet very closely. As always, whatever I put in here, I put in there because I believe it is important for you to know. So if there's something I say in the explanation video and it just kind of goes in one ear and out the other, you're going to be at a disadvantage in doing well on the assignment. So one thing that I want to point out about the synthesis essay is the importance of following these bullet points right here about what your synthesis essay should do. But I also want to emphasize the fact that you should not do one paragraph per bullet. And I'm pretty sure I made that pretty clear in the first explanation video. So your synthesis essay should present an original thesis statement about the topic. That is step one. And I think most of you did a good job with this. Most of your introductions had a thesis statement that was your own argument about whatever topic or issue you were discussing. But that being said, there were a lot of introductions that also spent a lot of time talking about your authors or your articles that you found, and you don't need to do that. This is your paper about your argument. The articles are just there to support you. So you do not need to bloat your introduction by telling us about a couple of articles that you found. You can save the articles for when you need to cite your evidence. And some of you did a nice job with this, but a lot of us spent a lot of our introductions introducing author A and who that person is and what they wrote, and author B and who they are and what that person wrote. You don't need to do that. Okay, an introduction in an argumentative paper like this is something that should introduce the topic, draw the reader's attention in, give the reader a preview for what you're going to cover in the paper, and then deliver your strong, clear, original, specific, debatable, relevant thesis statement. Okay. The first paper, the close reading, is kind of an exception in this regard because that was a paper about an article. The whole point of that assignment was to analyze the article. Your thesis was about the article and the way it was written. Okay. Moving forward, the argumentative papers that we write are not about the articles, they're about the topics. And so you don't need to stuff the articles into your introduction. Likewise, the next thing your paper needs to do is introduce the authors and summarize the article's main ideas. And what I mean by that is we won't have read the articles that you have found, so you need to set these up for us. You need to tell us who the authors are and what the articles are about very briefly. What you don't need to do is write your introduction and then give me a whole paragraph about author A. So a vast majority of drafts that I read over the past few days had introduction, hopefully with a thesis, and then the second paragraph was, so-and-so is an author from this, that, and the other thing, and wrote article A. And then the paragraph after that, so-and-so is a journalist from this, that, and the other thing, and wrote article B. Right? You don't need entire paragraphs dedicated to explaining these articles to us. Okay, this is your paper governed by your thesis and supported by your main ideas. If you give us your thesis, and then you kind of like say, but let me talk about these 2 articles that I found for a page and a half. It just kind of, it's distracting. It sounds weird. It's like you're taking a sharp right turn. It distracts from your argument. So again, the articles are your evidence. They're your support. They're not the focus. So you don't need to spend a ton of time summarizing or paraphrasing or giving us their whole biography. Okay? So that's really important. Again, really all this paper is your thesis, your main idea, your main idea, your main idea, your main idea, your conclusion. Somewhere in those main ideas, there are authors, there is evidence, there are citations, there are quotes and analysis and responses to those quotes to help you support your main ideas. But it's all in service of your own thesis. So like I said in the explanation video, this is not a paper about 2 articles. This is a paper about your own argument that uses 2 articles to help you make that argument. Okay, very important. Find, invent, and demonstrate connections between the 2 articles. So this is the synthesis component, right? And some of you had no problem doing this and actually did it throughout the paper, which was very impressive. But this is really the most challenging part of the assignment, is to demonstrate how the 2 authors' ideas relate to each other. This author says this, but on the other hand, author A says this. Or author B says this, and similarly, author A says this. Whatever that connection is, you're using that connection to, again, support your own thesis and your own argument. Okay? So make sure at some point in your paper you make an effort to explain to us how the 2 authors' ideas fit together. And yes, this is one instance where giving us 2 quotes and explaining the relationship between 2 quotes is appropriate. And then again, use these connections to support your own argument, right? So again, it's all about your argument. This paper is really 80% you and 20% the articles, okay? Quite a few drafts that I read were like thesis and then articles, 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 articles. That's not the point, okay? If I had asked you to do a book report on a couple of articles that you found, that might have been a good idea. Or, hey, or if I asked you to do a compare and contrast essay of 2 articles, that might have been appropriate, right? But that is not something that you should be doing in a synthesis essay like this. Okay? It's really all about your argument, using the articles to support your argument. So it would be impossible to write a good paper and do a paragraph per bullet like this. Okay, so I didn't add that caveat like I did with the first essay assignment, but these are just things that you should do at some point in your essay. They're not things that you should do in order, paragraph by paragraph. At this point, since it's here, I'll just emphasize this point again. Comparing and contrasting is a good skill. It's important to know how to do that, pointing out similarities and differences. But this is not a compare and contrast essay. It's a synthesis essay. So you have to go further than just pointing out similarities and differences. You have to tell us what is significant about those similarities and differences. And when I say what is significant, what I mean is, how do those similarities or differences relate to your point of view, your opinion, your argument, your thesis? Let's see, that's what I just said. Boom, look at that. Again, this paper is not about 2 articles. This paper uses 2 articles to make an original argument. Okay, so here's something that I wrote on a lot of your overall comments on your drafts. And that is thinking about how to organize this paper. So whatever your thesis is, that's your argument, right? It's the thing that you are trying to prove. It's what your whole essay is about. Everything in the paper works to support and prove and reinforce your thesis. Convince your reader that your thesis is valid, maybe even get them to agree with your thesis. So let's say it's something simple like Radiohead is the best band, right? Again, oversimplification. Obviously, that's not a super great thesis, but just for the sake of the example. So that's your thesis statement. So now what you need is you need main ideas to support your thesis statement. So how do you come up with those main ideas? You turn it into a question. Why is Radiohead the best band? Question mark. Okay. This is not a question to put in your intro. It's not a question for your readers. This is a question for you in your writing process. And you ask yourself, well, They answer number one, right? They are Radiohead is the best band because of their emotional lyrics. I don't know, right? That is a topic sentence, right? For a body paragraph. It is a main idea that tells me that in this paragraph, I'm going to talk about the emotional lyrics, right, of Radiohead songs. Okay? And how does that support my thesis statement? Well, because this is one of the reasons why Radiohead is the best band. Okay, very simple, very straightforward. Why else is Radiohead the best band? Radiohead is also one of the greatest live acts of the 21st century. Right? There's another topic sentence for a body paragraph or a body section. It's a main idea. That's really all you're doing in this paper. Thesis, main idea, main idea, main idea, main idea, main idea. When you need evidence, right, that's when you bring in the authors. That's when you bring in the articles. Joe so-and-so writes in his article review of Radiohead's 2018 performance in Boston that quote about the lyrics that helps me to prove my point, my main idea, right? Then I explain that quote and I explain how it connects back to my idea, my thesis, my argument. You see? Okay? Should be very straightforward. Hey, don't overthink it. It is your argument in this paper and you're using articles to help you prove your point. So this is the process that I recommend, and I wrote this on a lot of drafts. What is your thesis? Then what are your main ideas that are going to help you prove that thesis? To help you come up with main ideas, ask yourself, how do I turn my thesis into a question, just for me, just in my head, just on my planning paper over here? Why is Radiohead the best band? Answer, answer, answer. These are your body paragraphs. These are your main ideas. Very simple, very straightforward. Okay? All right. What else? What is synthesis? I mean, I kind of talked about that already, right? The point of this essay is to make connections between two sources, right? Remember, you have read two articles that we have not read. So your job is to, at some point, kind of hold them both up for us and say, this person says this and this person says this. Do they fit together? Are they complete opposites of one another? How does that work? Why does that work? Is one of them right and one of them wrong? Okay, doesn't matter how you go about doing it, but you're just trying to make connections and explain those connections to us, your humble reader who has not read the articles. You should really only be using two sources for this paper. Okay, there's a reason why I ask you to only use two sources, because I think you have plenty of work to do just doing a good job using two sources. If you're using more than two sources, you are making your job more challenging and more risky, because the more sources you have to balance, the more difficult it's going to be to pull it off. Okay, so I strongly encourage you to stick with two sources. Let's see. I'll go back to my Word document for a second. I know we've talked about this before, but it's super important here. It's really easy to fall into the habit of starting paragraphs with quotes, and you have to resist this temptation. We start paragraphs with quotes because we don't know what to say next, right? And we just know that we have this quote highlighted or underlined, so we know we're going to talk about it eventually. So new paragraph, I don't really know. So I'll just say, in her article, Jane Smith says, quote, and then I'll talk about the quote. But a quote is not a main idea. A quote is not a main idea. It's very important that your paragraphs in your papers start with your main ideas. That's how you stay in control. It's how you keep the reader with you. If you start with a quote, the reader is confused, right? Because you're just giving a quote with no context. There's no nest that it's all nice and comfy. There's no quote sandwich supporting that quote. It's just like, I don't know, here's a quote, right? It doesn't make you look good. It doesn't make you look like you know what you're talking about. I know it's easier to just start your paragraphs with quotes, okay? But writing is a process of trying to understand what you want to say. Okay, so clear writing is clear thinking. If you feel that like, oh, I'm confused, or oh, I'm stuck, or oh, I don't know what to say, and you let that feeling win, if you let it intimidate you into paralysis and just saying, I don't know what to do. Here's a quote, right? If you do that, sure, you're going to hit your word count faster or whatever, but it's not going to be a strong paper compared to, I'm stuck. What do I want to say next about my topic, about my thesis, about my argument? That is the hard work of being an educated person. The value in this class is the process of writing papers. And I know you think, I'm never going to have to write a paper after I finish my English classes, Mr. Marvin, or after I finish college or whatever. But the point is not about writing papers. I'm not trying to teach you how to write a paper. What we're trying to learn is how to formulate a clear argument that is not just easy to understand, but impossible to misunderstand. Okay? And it is that process of taking these ideas that are just floating around, bouncing around up here, and turning them into clear, articulate, elegant sentences that other people can read and understand and enjoy. That is where the hard work comes in. That is where the critical thinking comes in. That is where you become better at the human experience. Okay, so please don't start your paragraphs with quotes. Start them with your own main ideas. What else do we have here? Let your voice lead, right? It's the same deal, right? That's everything that we've been talking about so far. Let your voice lead. It's your paper. It's not about the authors. They're there for you to take advantage of, for you to respond to, but respond to in the context of your own argument. Always comment directly on the quote, right? So you want to explain what the quote says and then contribute something, right? So remember I say chapters 3 and 4, 3 different ways to respond. You can agree with a quote, but if you agree, you have to agree with a difference. You have to add something else. It's not enough to just say, I agree, or me too. If you disagree, obviously you have to explain why you disagree. You have to add something, right? So what? Who cares? How does this relate back to your thesis? Don't end paragraphs with quotes either. Okay? Just like you don't start paragraphs with quotes. So you explain the quotes and then you contribute something to the quote. As always, be careful about quoting things back to back. Again, this is a really tempting thing to do because it makes your paragraph really big really quickly, right? The author says, quote. Then she goes on to say another quote. She also says a third quote. And now you've given us 3 quotes and you haven't said anything. Okay? So I can see what you're doing. So don't do that because, again, you're making your job more difficult. Okay? One of my things that I've been saying over and over again in recent semesters is to think small. One thing at a time, one sentence at a time, one word at a time, paragraph by paragraph, idea by idea, bird by bird, as Anne Lamott would say. So when you give us 2 quotes back to back, you've made your job super difficult because the reader is going to expect you to explain and analyze and relate both of those quotes back to your thesis. Okay, why are you giving me these 2 quotes if they don't serve a very important role in your argument, in your essay? Now, in a synthesis paper like this, you may need to cite 2 quotes at the same time, okay, but it's still a very delicate process of setting up the quote, introducing it, explaining it, and then introducing the other quote, setting it up, introducing it, explaining it, and then explaining how they fit together. So using quotes effectively is not just a box that you check. Mr. Marvin wants some quotes, so I'll just throw some quotes in there. If you do that, it will not go well for you. Quoting or using quotes is a matter of thinking critically about other people's ideas and figuring out how to fit them into your own ideas, how they relate to your own ideas. It's a much more important and valuable skill than just learning how to type the quotation mark punctuation symbol. Okay? It is a fundamental aspect of what this course is about. Again, 80% you, 20% the articles. Okay, this is not an 80% articles paper with a little bit of you here and there. This is 80% your voice. And once in a while, in that other 20%, you bring in somebody else to help you convey your own ideas, to help you get your points across. Again, you don't need to introduce your sources in your intro. It bloats a paragraph that should really be almost 100% your voice. So in the same way that with a paragraph, right, quote sandwich, right, it's always you, your topic sentence, your elaboration of your main idea, then a quote, right, a setup for the quote, set up quote, then the quote itself, then the explain, sorry, I'm typing fast, explain the quote, relate the quote back to your thesis, right? That is your voice. Again, okay? So quote sandwich, right? You, then a nice juicy quote, then you, right? It's not an open-faced sandwich where you start the paragraph with a quote. It's the same thing at the paragraph level in an essay. Okay, your introduction, which has your thesis, is like the top piece of bread in a paragraph or in a quote sandwich. Okay, we don't start our paragraphs with quotes. Likewise, we don't start our paragraphs by introducing a bunch of authors that we found. Again, the first paper was an exception because of the nature of that assignment. Now it's all about you and your ideas. Okay? It's about your I say. You use the they say as needed to support your ideas, but it's all about your voice first and foremost. Again, watch out for it and watch out for this. Right? These are ambiguous pronouns. It can be unclear what you are referring to. Okay, so when you say it, make sure it's clear what it is. And when you say this, make sure it's clear what this is. Synthesis essay is not a compare and contrast essay. We've already talked about that at length. Comparing and contrasting is just here's what's the same and here's what's different. It's not a compare and contrast essay. This is college level writing. So you need to take it further than just saying here's what's the same and here's what's different. If there are similarities between the two authors' arguments, that's great. If there are differences, that's also great. But you need to tell us so what about those articles. Who cares? How does that relate back to your thesis? That's what we want to know. Article titles are set in quotation marks, right? So article title looks like this. Book title is in italics. Whoops, that's bold, sorry. Book title, newspaper title, album title. Okay, all those things are italicized, but article titles are set in quotation marks. A chapter of a book would be in quotation marks. A song on an album would be in quotation marks. And then finally, readers want the answer, not the question. So before, when I was talking about how to organize your paper and turning your thesis into a question, it's the same thing. The reader wants the answer, right? So try to resist in your intro being all wishy-washy and mysterious. But how dangerous is the coronavirus really? That's not a thesis. That's a hypothetical question. If you want to write a paper about that, that's great. But the process of writing the paper is a process of trying to answer that question. And then the final draft should not start with the question. It should start with the answer because that's the thesis. Okay? So that's really important. So quite a few drafts that were kind of, wishy-washy in terms of what their actual argument was. Questions are very valuable in terms of your writing process, but the product that you hand in to me to be graded or that you give to somebody to read should not be, you should never reveal to them what your process was like. Okay? It's like if you were a magician, right? You don't show your audience your process, your days, your weeks, your months of practicing and practicing and practicing and trying to figure out how to do this card trick or how to do this magic trick over and over and over again, right? They don't want to see that. What they want is for you to show them the finished product, which is the perfect magic trick, right? Where they don't understand how you did it. So your writing process is like that process of trying to figure out how to do the trick, okay? Writing is a process of trying to understand. But once you understand what you're trying to say, you give the reader your understanding. You don't give them your process of trying to understand. Okay? That's all I have for the synthesis essay. I feel like I had one more thing that came to mind. In terms of the topics that you guys are doing, some of you have articles that are like one person is for, or one person is against, or one person is pro, one person is con, things like that. Or one person looks at the good things, one person looks at the bad things, or whatever. Your thesis needs to be more than just there are pros and cons, or there are advantages and disadvantages to something, or there are good aspects and bad aspects of topic X. Okay? Saying that there are good and bad things, or that there are pros and cons, or advantages or disadvantages, or some things that work well and some things that are not so good, that's not really a thesis. That's a statement of fact. Most things have things that are good about them and things that are not so good about them. So you can't really write an argumentative paper about how there are pros and cons to whatever the issue is. You can explore those pros and cons, but what you need to do is, again, take it further. Given these pros and these cons, these advantages, these disadvantages, these good things, these bad things, so what? Who cares? What are we supposed to do with that information? How should we live our lives given all of this information, given these pros and cons, given these advantages and disadvantages? Okay, that's what the argument is. The argument is not, it's good or bad, depending on how you look at it. That's a weak thesis, okay? A strong thesis is, given these factors and these factors, so what? What should we do about that? What do you want us to think about those pros and cons? Okay, so that's a really important thing to keep in mind as well. Okay, if you have any questions about anything I said in this video or anything I did not say in this video, please do post in course questions. That is a discussion board forum. So if you go into Blackboard to click on discussion boards, the first forum at the top will be called course questions. Click on that, create a thread, type up your question. That way I can see your question and everybody will be able to see my answer. Okay, so I hope you guys are well. I hope you are staying healthy, staying home, staying safe. If you have any questions, get in touch. Otherwise, we're moving into peer review next week. So we'll see you guys online.